I watched Marcus Aurelius, the Alpha King who once promised me forever, place the crown on her head. Livia, the golden-haired daughter of the Southern Territories, with her perfect smile and her flawless bloodline. The entire court of the Silver Moon Kingdom erupted in cheers as he kissed her hand, and I stood there in the shadows, wearing the pale blue dress I'd carefully chosen for what I thought would be our coronation day. My hands trembled as I gripped the stone pillar beside me, my wolf howling inside my chest, a sound no one else could hear. He didn't even glance in my direction. Not once. If you've ever felt invisible to someone who once made you feel like the center of their universe, hit that subscribe button right now. And tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because you're going to need one for this story. My name is Cassia Silvanus, and 3 years ago I was nobody. The orphan daughter of 2 wolves killed in the Great Border War, raised in the servants' quarters of the palace, scrubbing floors and serving meals to people who looked through me like I was made of glass. I had no pack status, no family name, no prospects. Just a stubborn heart and a wolf spirit that refused to break, no matter how many times the other servants mocked me for the threadbare clothes I wore or the calluses on my hands. Then one winter evening everything changed. I was carrying a stack of firewood through the east gardens when I heard it. A low, agonized growl coming from behind the frozen rose bushes. I dropped the wood and ran toward the sound, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air, and that's when I found him. Marcus Aurelius himself, the Crown Prince of the Silver Moon Kingdom, collapsed in the snow with 3 arrows protruding from his back. Blood stained the white ground beneath him crimson, and his golden eyes were glazed with pain. I should have run for the royal guards. That would have been the proper thing to do, the safe thing to do. But something in those eyes stopped me. A vulnerability I'd never seen in any of the royals who passed through the palace halls with their chins held high and their gazes fixed on the horizon, never on the servants beneath them. So instead of running, I knelt beside him in the snow, tore strips from my own dress, and began wrapping his wounds with shaking hands. He was so heavy I could barely move him, but somehow I managed to drag him into the gardener's shed, where I spent the entire night keeping him warm, changing his bandages, and praying to the moon goddess that he wouldn't die before morning. When dawn broke and his fever finally subsided, his eyes opened and focused on my face. I'll never forget what he said to me. His voice was rough, damaged from hours of fevered delirium, but his words were clear. "You saved my life. Who are you?" I told him I was no one, just a servant. But he shook his head and reached up to touch my cheek with blood-stained fingers. "No," he whispered. "You're something more. I can feel it." That was the beginning of everything. The beginning of secret meetings in the gardens after midnight, of stolen kisses behind the library stacks, of whispered promises that we would find a way to be together despite the impossible gulf between our stations. Marcus would sneak away from his duties and find me in whatever corner of the palace I was working, and we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about the crushing weight of royal expectations, about how everyone wanted something from him and no one saw him as just Marcus, just a man. And I told him about my dreams of freedom, of running through forests without fear, of belonging somewhere. "You belong with me," he'd said one night, 6 months after we met, as we lay together in the hidden alcove we'd claimed as our sanctuary. His arms were wrapped around me, and I could feel his heartbeat against my back, strong and steady. "When I become king, things will be different. I'll make you my queen, Cassia. I don't care what the council says. I don't care about bloodlines or politics. I choose you." I believed him. God's help me, I believed every word. For 2 years we built a world together in the shadows. He taught me to read the ancient texts in the royal library. I taught him to laugh again, to find joy in simple things like watching the sunrise or listening to rain on the palace roof. My wolf recognized his wolf as her mate, and his recognized mine. The bond between us grew stronger every day, until I couldn't imagine a future that didn't include him, until his heartbeat felt like my own. Then his father, the old king, died suddenly in his sleep. The entire kingdom went into mourning, and Marcus became King Marcus Aurelius overnight. I waited for him to announce our relationship, to tell the council that he'd chosen his queen. I waited in our secret alcove every night for a week, wearing my best dress, my heart full of hope. He never came. Instead, I heard the news from the other servants. The new king was entering negotiations for a political marriage with Livia of the southern territories, the daughter of Alpha Quintus, whose armies controlled the richest lands in the realm. A union that would secure peace and prosperity for generations. The wedding would take place in 3 months. I couldn't breathe. I ran through the palace corridors, not caring who saw me, until I found him in the throne room surrounded by advisors. "Marcus," I called out, and every head turned toward me. The advisors looked scandalized that a servant would dare address the king by his first name. But Marcus just looked tired. So unbearably tired. "Cassia," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here." "You promised me," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You promised." He stood from the throne and walked toward me, and for one beautiful foolish moment, I thought he would take my hand and tell everyone in that room that I was his choice. Instead, he stopped 3 feet away from me and said, "I'm sorry. I have responsibilities now. Responsibilities to the kingdom. What we had was... It was beautiful, but it wasn't real. It couldn't be." Something inside me shattered. My wolf howled so loudly I thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it, but they just stared at me with pity or contempt. I turned and ran until I couldn't run anymore, until I collapsed in the servants' quarters and sobbed until I had no tears left. But I didn't leave. Couldn't. Some pathetic part of me still hoped he would change his mind, that he would realize what he was giving up. So I stayed and I watched as he courted Livia, as he smiled at her the way he once smiled at me, as he danced with her at elaborate balls I served drinks at, invisible once again. The worst part was that Livia wasn't cruel. If she had been a monster, it would have been easier. But she was kind and gracious, and she treated the servants with respect. She even spoke to me once, asking my name and thanking me for my service with genuine warmth in her eyes. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. She was just a woman playing the role she'd been born to play, just like Marcus was playing his. The wedding was the most magnificent event the Silver Moon Kingdom had seen in a century. 10,000 guests, flowers from every corner of the realm, a feast that lasted 3 days. And I was there for all of it, serving wine and clearing plates, watching the man I loved pledge his life to someone else. When the ceremony ended and he kissed her in front of the entire kingdom, I felt the mate bond between us twist and contort, turning from something beautiful into something agonizing. That night, after the celebrations finally ended and the palace fell silent, I packed the few belongings I owned into a canvas bag. I was done. I would leave at first light and never return, even if it meant becoming a rogue wolf with no pack to protect me. Anything was better than this torture. But as I was preparing to slip out through the servants' entrance, someone grabbed my arm. I spun around to find Marcus standing there in the darkness, still wearing his wedding clothes. His eyes wild and desperate. "Don't go," he pleaded. "Please, Cassia. I know I hurt you. I know I broke my promises. But I need you to stay. I need to know you're here, even if we can't be together. Please." I should have ripped my arm from his grasp and walked away. That's what a strong woman would have done. But I wasn't strong anymore. I was broken and pathetic and still desperately in love with him despite everything. So I stayed. The months that followed were a special kind of hell. Marcus and Livia settled into their roles as king and queen, attending state functions and ruling the kingdom with wisdom and grace. They seemed happy, at least to outside observers. But late at night Marcus would find me. He'd come to my small room in the servants' quarters, and we'd fall into each other's arms like nothing had changed, like he hadn't chosen someone else, like every moment we spent together wasn't a betrayal of his wife and my own self-respect. "I love you," he'd whisper against my skin. "You're the only one I've ever truly loved." And I'd believe him because I wanted to. Because in those stolen hours, I could pretend that I was his choice, that I mattered, that I wasn't just the servant he kept hidden away for his own comfort. I became his secret, his shame. The woman he couldn't claim but wouldn't let go. This went on for a year. A full year of living in the shadows, of being his escape while Livia wore the crown that should have been mine. Until the night that changed everything. I was in my room when I heard the knock. It was late, well past midnight, and I assumed it was Marcus coming for one of our secret meetings. But when I opened the door, it was Livia standing there. Queen Livia, in a simple nightgown with her golden hair unbound. Her eyes red from crying. "I know," she said simply. "About you and Marcus. I've known for months." My blood turned to ice. I started to stammer out an apology, but she held up her hand. "I'm not here to condemn you," she said quietly. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, too shocked to do anything else, and she entered my tiny room. She looked around at my sparse belongings, at the single candle burning on my nightstand, and something like understanding crossed her face. She sat down on my bed and gestured for me to sit beside her. "I was raised to be a queen," she began, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "From the time I was a small child, I was taught that my feelings didn't matter, that my purpose was to serve my kingdom through a political alliance. When I married Marcus, I hoped that maybe, eventually we could build something real. But I see the way he looks past me, the way he disappears in the middle of the night. And I know he's going to you." "I'm sorry," I whispered, and I meant it. "I'm so sorry." I tried to leave. I should have left. She turned to look at me, and there was no anger in her eyes. Only sadness. "I can't give him what you give him," she said. "Whatever you two share, it's something I'll never have with him. And part of me hates you for that. But mostly, I just pity both of us." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm pregnant," she said, and my world tilted on its axis. "I found out 3 days ago. I'm carrying the heir to the Silver Moon Kingdom. And when that child is born, this charade has to end. I need to know that you'll do the right thing, Cassia. I need to know that you'll leave and give my child a chance at a family that isn't built on lies and betrayal." I felt like I was drowning. Baby. Marcus was going to have a baby with Livia. The heir he needed, the family he deserved. And I was just the servant girl who couldn't let go. "I'll leave," I heard myself say. "As soon as the baby is born, I'll go. You have my word." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she stood and walked to the door, pausing to look back at me one last time. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think he did love you. Maybe he still does. But love isn't always enough, is it?" She left, and I sat alone in the darkness, feeling the full weight of what I'd become. The other woman. The secret. The fool who'd given up her dignity for scraps of affection from a man who'd chosen someone else. Marcus came to me the next night, and I told him about Livia's visit. He went pale. "She knows," he breathed. "Gods, Cassia, I never meant for her to find out." "What did you think would happen?" I asked, and for the first time there was anger in my voice. Real burning anger. "Did you think we could keep doing this forever? That she would never notice her husband sneaking away to be with the servant girl?" "I don't know," he said helplessly. I couldn't give you up." I tried, Cassia. "After the wedding I tried to let you go. But every time I see you, every time I'm near you, nothing else matters. Not the crown, not my responsibilities, not even your wife," I finished. "The wife who's carrying your child." He nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She told you." "She asked me to leave after the baby is born," I said. "And I agreed. This has to end, Marcus. We both know it." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled me against him, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I can't lose you," he said against my hair. "You're a part of me, Cassia. How am I supposed to just let you walk away?" "The same way you let me go when you married her," I said, pulling back to look at his face. "You make a choice. You put your kingdom first like you always do. And this time I'm making it easier for you. I'm choosing to leave." We spent that night together, and we both knew it would be our last. In the morning, he kissed me goodbye with tears streaming down his face, and I watched him walk away, heading back to his queen and his future. And I began counting down the days until I could finally leave this place that had brought me so much joy and so much pain. 8 months later, on a stormy night in early spring, Livia went into labor. The entire palace was in chaos, with physicians and midwives rushing through the corridors, and Marcus pacing outside the birthing chamber like a caged animal. I stayed in the servants' quarters, packing my belongings and trying not to think about the fact that after tonight, I would never see him again. But then, just after midnight, a guard came to my door. "The queen is asking for you," he said, and my blood ran cold. "She wants you in the birthing chamber." Now, I didn't understand. Why would Livia want me there for the birth of her child? But I followed the guard through the winding hallways until we reached the royal chambers. The sounds coming from inside were horrific. Screams of agony that made my skin crawl. Marcus was being held back by 2 advisors, his face twisted with fear and helplessness. When I entered the chamber, the midwives barely glanced at me. Livia was on the bed, soaked in sweat, her face contorted in pain. But when she saw me, something like relief crossed her features. "Cassia," she gasped. "Come here." I approached the bed, not knowing what she wanted, and she reached out to grab my hand with crushing strength. "I need you to promise me something," she said between contractions. "If I don't survive this." "Don't say that," I interrupted. "You're going to be fine. Promise me," she insisted, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that terrified me. "If I die tonight, promise me you'll help Marcus raise this child. Promise me you won't leave. My baby will need someone who loves their father, even if he's too broken to see it. Promise me." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell her that I couldn't possibly stay and watch Marcus raise a child with her, that it would destroy me. But there was something in her eyes, some desperate plea that I couldn't ignore. "I promise," I whispered. She smiled then, a small, sad smile, and squeezed my hand one more time before another contraction hit. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I stayed by her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement while the midwives worked frantically. And then, finally, a baby's cry filled the chamber. A strong, healthy cry that made everyone in the room sag with relief. "A boy," the head midwife announced, holding up the squirming infant. "A healthy son." Marcus burst into the room, and the look on his face when he saw his son was something I'll never forget. Pure, overwhelming love mixed with terror and awe. The midwife placed the baby in Livia's arms, and she looked down at her son with tears streaming down her face. "Titus," she whispered. "His name is Titus Aurelius." For a moment everything was perfect. Livia holding her baby, Marcus kneeling beside the bed with his hand on his son's tiny head, the entire room filled with joy and relief. But then Livia's face went pale, deathly pale. "Something's wrong," she said, and then blood began pouring from her. So much blood that the white sheets turned crimson in seconds. The midwives started shouting, pushing Marcus and me away from the bed as they tried desperately to stop the bleeding. But I could see it in their faces. They couldn't save her. Livia's eyes found mine across the room. "Remember your promise," she mouthed, and then her eyes closed and she was gone. Just like that. One moment a mother holding her newborn son, the next moment empty and still. The room erupted in chaos. Marcus was screaming Livia's name, trying to get to her body while guards held him back. The baby was wailing, passed frantically between midwives. And I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Livia was dead. The queen was dead. And I'd promised her I would stay. The funeral was held 3 days later. The entire kingdom mourned their beloved queen, the gentle soul who'd been taken too soon. Marcus was like a ghost, hollow-eyed and silent, barely able to function. He held baby Titus during the ceremony, and the infant's cries seemed to be the only thing that could pierce through his fog of grief. I tried to leave after the funeral. I'd packed my things and was halfway to the palace gates when Marcus found me. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice dead and flat. "I can't stay here," I said. "Marcus, I'm so sorry about Livia." She was a good person. But I can't. She asked you to promise something, didn't she? He interrupted. The night Titus was born. She asked you to stay. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. But I can't do it. I'm not strong enough. Please, he said, and the brokenness in his voice shattered what was left of my resolve. I can't do this alone, Cassia. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to raise him without her. And you're the only person who... He trailed off, unable to finish. So once again I stayed. But everything was different now. Marcus threw himself into ruling the kingdom and caring for Titus, and I became the child's unofficial nanny, the servant who fed him and rocked him to sleep when he cried through the night. Marcus and I didn't speak about our past, didn't acknowledge what we'd once been to each other. We existed in a strange limbo, two people bound together by grief and responsibility, and a baby who needed us both. Titus grew into a beautiful child. He had his mother's golden hair and his father's eyes, and from the moment he could smile, he smiled at me. I loved him despite everything. How could I not? He was innocent in all of this, a child who'd lost his mother before he ever knew her. So I stayed month after month, year after year, watching him grow, telling him stories about the brave and gentle queen he'd never known. When Titus turned 5, Marcus began preparing him for his future role as heir to the Silver Moon Kingdom. The boy was sharp and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. And he was stubborn. Gods, was he stubborn. Whenever he didn't want to do his lessons, he'd run away from his tutors and hide in the palace gardens. And the only person who could always find him was me. Miss Cassia, he'd say when I discovered him behind the rose bushes or up in the old oak tree. Do I really have to be king someday? It seems very boring. I'd laugh and ruffle his hair. Your father is king and he's not boring, I'd say. Well, not very boring. But Papa is sad all the time, Titus would observe with the brutal honesty of children. I don't want to be sad like him. He was right. Marcus was sad. The grief over losing Livia had never really faded, and as the years passed, it seemed to settle into his bones, turning him into someone harder and more distant. He was a good king, fair and just, but there was no warmth left in him. Except when he looked at Titus. His son was the only light in his darkness. On Titus's 7th birthday, Marcus held a grand celebration. The entire court was invited, along with dignitaries from neighboring kingdoms. I stayed in the background as always, making sure the servants had everything they needed, trying to remain invisible. But Titus had other ideas. In the middle of the feast, he climbed up onto his chair and announced in his clear, high voice, I want to thank Miss Cassia for being the bestest person in the whole world. She's nicer than anyone, even nicer than cake. The entire hall fell silent. All eyes turned to me, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. But Titus just beamed at me, completely oblivious to the scandal he'd just caused. A servant, being praised by the prince in front of the entire court. It was unheard of. Marcus stood slowly from his throne, and for a moment I thought he would be angry. But instead, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Thank you, Cassia, he said formally, for your devoted service to my son. It was a public acknowledgement, a validation I'd never expected. And from that day forward, people in the palace began treating me differently. Not as an equal, certainly, but with a respect I'd never experienced. I was no longer just another servant. I was the woman who'd helped raise the prince. The years continued to pass. Titus grew taller and stronger, training with weapons and studying statecraft and learning what it meant to lead. And I grew older, the lines around my eyes deepening, my hands becoming more worn. I'd given up my youth to this palace, to this man and his son. I'd sacrificed any chance at my own family, my own life. When Titus was 15, everything changed again. A delegation arrived from the northern territories, seeking to negotiate a trade agreement. They brought with them their daughter, a striking young woman named Claudia Marcellus with black hair and eyes like ice. She was brilliant and beautiful and ambitious, and within a week of her arrival, it was clear that Marcus was interested in her. I told myself I didn't care. Marcus and I hadn't been intimate since before Livia died. Hadn't even really spoken beyond the necessities of caring for Titus. We were strangers who happened to share a past and a child we both loved. So why did it feel like a knife twisting in my chest when I saw him smile at Claudia the way he once smiled at me? The courtship was swift. Within 3 months, Marcus announced his engagement to Claudia. The wedding would take place in the spring. And once again, I would be the servant watching the man I loved marry someone else. Except this time it didn't hurt quite as much. Maybe I'd finally used up all my tears. Maybe I'd finally accepted that Marcus Aurelius was never going to choose me, no matter how many times fate pushed us together. But Titus was devastated. He'd hoped his father would remain unmarried, that somehow things could continue as they were. "I don't want a new mother," he told me the night the engagement was announced, crying against my shoulder like he hadn't done since he was small. "I had a mother, and I have you. Why does Papa need to marry her?" "Because kings need queens," I explained gently. "And your father has been alone for a long time. Maybe this will make him happy again." "But what about you?" Titus asked, pulling back to look at me with those golden eyes so like his father's. "Won't you be sad if he marries her?" I forced a smile. "I'll be fine, little prince. I'm always fine." The wedding preparations began, and I threw myself into helping organize everything, staying busy so I wouldn't have to think or feel. Claudia was not like Livia. She was colder, more calculating. She looked at me with barely concealed suspicion, as if she could sense that I was more than just a servant. But she was smart enough not to cause problems before the wedding. She simply watched and waited. 2 weeks before the ceremony, I was in the palace library returning some books when Marcus found me. I hadn't been alone with him in months, and suddenly the air felt too thick to breathe. "Cassia," he said quietly, "can we talk?" "About what?" I asked, not turning to face him. "About us. About everything that's happened. I know I have no right to ask you this, but I need to know. Do you hate me?" I finally turned to look at him. He looked older than his years, the weight of his crown and his grief aging him prematurely. But he was still beautiful to me, still the man I'd saved in the gardens all those years ago. "I don't hate you," I said truthfully. "I never could. I never stopped loving you," he whispered. "Not for a single day. Even when I married Livia. Even now, when I'm about to marry Claudia. You're the only woman I've ever truly loved, Cassia. You have to know that." "Then why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why do you keep choosing everyone else?" "Because loving you isn't enough," he said, and there was so much pain in his eyes. "I'm the king. I have to think about the kingdom, about alliances and bloodlines and politics. What we have, what we had, it's beautiful, but it's not enough to build a kingdom on. I wish it was. Gods, I wish it was." "So you're going to marry Claudia and pretend I don't exist," I said. "Again. I'm going to marry Claudia because it's what's best for the kingdom," he corrected. "But I'm also giving you something. A piece of land on the eastern border, with a small house and enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of your life. After the wedding, I want you to go there. I want you to finally live for yourself, Cassia. Find someone who can give you what I never could." I laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You think I want your money? Your pity? After everything, you think you can just pay me off and send me away with a clear conscience? I think I owe you more than I could ever repay," he said. "And I think keeping you here, watching me marry someone else again, is cruel. Please, Cassia, take what I'm offering and leave this place. Be happy. That's all I've ever wanted for you." I wanted to throw his offer back in his face. I wanted to tell him that he was a coward and a liar, that he'd wasted both our lives with his inability to choose what he really wanted. But I was so tired. Tired of loving someone who would never truly be mine, tired of living in the shadows, tired of hoping for something that was never going to happen. "Fine," I said. "I'll go. But not until after the wedding. I promised Livia I would take care of Titus, and I need to make sure he's okay before I leave." Marcus nodded, relief and sorrow warring on his face. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For saving my life all those years ago. For staying when you should have run. For loving my son. For—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said, and walked away before he could see me cry. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather. Claudia looked stunning in her gown of silver and white, and Marcus looked like a king from a fairy tale in his ceremonial robes. The ceremony was beautiful, the celebration magnificent, and through it all I felt nothing. Just a blessed, peaceful numbness that made it possible to watch without breaking. But Titus wasn't numb. He sat through the ceremony with his jaw clenched and his hands fisted in his lap, and as soon as it ended, he disappeared. I found him hours later in our old hiding spot in the gardens, the same place where I'd found his father bleeding in the snow all those years ago. He was 15 years old, almost a man, but in that moment he looked like a lost child. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I told him, sitting down beside him on the stone bench. "Your father has given me a house on the eastern border. I think it's time for me to go." "No," Titus said immediately, turning to face me with panic in his eyes. "You can't leave. You're the only mother I've ever known. You're the only person who makes sense to me. Please, Miss Cassia, don't go. Your father has a new wife now," I said gently. "She'll help him raise you. And you're almost grown. You don't need me anymore." "I'll always need you," he insisted, and there were tears on his cheeks. "You're the one who taught me everything that matters. How to be kind. How to see people for who they really are, not just their status. How to—" He paused, taking a shaky breath. "Father made a mistake when he chose grandmother Livia over you. I know he loved her, but he loves you more. Everyone can see it except him. And now he's made the same mistake again with Claudia. But I won't make that mistake. When I'm king, I'm going to choose differently. I'm going to choose love over duty." "Oh, little prince," I said, pulling him into my arms even though he was now taller than me. "The world isn't that simple. Your father isn't a bad man for the choices he made. He was trying to do what was best for his kingdom." "But what about what was best for you?" Titus asked. "What about what was best for him? All these years, I've watched him pretend to be happy when he's not. And I've watched you pretend you don't love him when you do. Why do adults make everything so complicated?" I didn't have an answer for him. So I just held him while he cried, memorizing the feel of him, knowing that this would likely be the last time. In the morning, I would pack my few belongings and leave the Silver Moon Palace forever. I would go to the house Marcus had given me and try to build some kind of life from the wreckage of all these wasted years. And Titus would stay here and grow into the king he was meant to be, with or without me. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. That night, as I was doing my final rounds of the servants' quarters, making sure everything was in order before my departure, I heard shouting coming from the east wing of the palace. I ran toward the commotion and found a crowd gathered outside Marcus's private chambers. Smoke was pouring from under the door, and I could hear Claudia screaming inside. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy cloak from a nearby hook, soaked it in water from a decorative fountain, and wrapped it around myself before charging through the door. The room was filled with thick smoke, and flames were eating through the curtains and climbing the walls. Claudia was trapped in the far corner, frozen with fear, and the fire was spreading too quickly for her to escape. I ran through the flames, feeling the heat sear my skin even through the wet cloak, and grabbed her arm. "Move!" I shouted, dragging her toward the door. She was too terrified to help, dead weight in my arms, but somehow I managed to get both of us through the inferno and out into the hallway. We collapsed on the floor just as the palace guards arrived with water buckets, coughing and choking on the smoke we'd inhaled. Marcus appeared seconds later, his face white with fear. "Claudia!" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside his new wife. But Claudia pushed him away and pointed at me. "She saved me," Claudia gasped. "That servant saved my life. For the second time, I'd saved a member of the royal family from death." But this time there was no romance in it, no secret meetings in gardens. Just exhaustion and pain and the grim satisfaction of having done the right thing one more time. The fire was eventually extinguished, though Marcus's chambers were destroyed. An investigation revealed that one of the ceremonial candles had been knocked over, starting the blaze. It was an accident, nothing more. But Claudia looked at me differently after that night. The suspicion in her eyes had been replaced by something else. Respect, maybe. Or fear. "You should have let me die," she said to me 2 days later, when we happened to cross paths in the palace gardens. I was supposed to have left by now, but my burns needed time to heal before I could travel. "If I was gone, you could have him. That's what you want, isn't it?" "Marcus. I wanted Marcus 20 years ago," I told her tiredly. "Now I just want peace. I'm leaving as soon as I can travel. You have nothing to fear from me, Queen Claudia." She studied me for a long moment, her ice blue eyes searching my face. "He still loves you," she said finally. "He tries to hide it, but I see it. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. The way he flinches when someone mentions your name. I'm his wife, but you're his, what? His ghost. His regret. His past," I said firmly. "That's all I am. And that's all I'll ever be." But I didn't leave. My burns became infected, and I developed a fever that kept me bedridden for 2 more weeks. Titus visited me every day, sneaking away from his lessons to sit by my bedside and read to me or just hold my hand. And once, late at night when the fever was at its worst, Marcus came. He sat in the chair beside my bed and watched me sleep, and when I woke briefly and saw him there, I thought I was hallucinating. "You should be with your wife," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I know," he said. "But I needed to see that you were going to be okay. You almost died saving her, Cassia. You almost died saving the woman I married instead of you." "I didn't do it for you," I told him. "I did it because it was right. Because someone needed help and I could provide it. That's all." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, and his touch was so gentle it made my heart ache. "You're a better person than I ever was," he said. "You always have been." When I finally recovered enough to travel, it was autumn. The leaves were turning gold and red, and there was a chill in the air that promised winter was coming. I said my goodbyes to the few servants who'd been kind to me over the years, packed my belongings one final time, and prepared to leave at dawn. Titus found me loading my things onto the small cart Marcus had provided. He was 17 now, nearly a man, tall and strong and so heartbreakingly like his father. "You're really going," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I have to," I said. "This isn't my home anymore. Maybe it never was." "It was your home because you were in it," Titus said fiercely. "You made it a home for me when no one else could. And I swear to you, Miss Cassia, when I become king, the first thing I'm going to do is bring you back. I'm going to give you the honor and respect you deserve. I'm going to make everyone see what I've always seen, that you're the real queen of this kingdom, even if you never wore the crown." I pulled him into one last embrace, tears streaming down my face. "You're going to be a great king," I whispered. "Better than your father. Better than any of us. Just promise me you'll be happy. Promise me you'll find someone who makes you feel alive, and don't let duty steal that from you." "I promise," he said. "But only if you promise to come back someday. Even just to visit. Please." "I promise," I lied because we both needed to believe it. I left the Silver Moon Palace as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I didn't look back. If I had, I might have seen Marcus watching from his window, his hand pressed against the glass, his face etched with a grief that would never fully heal. The house on the eastern border was small but comfortable. It sat on a hillside overlooking a valley, with a garden and a well and everything I needed to live a quiet, simple life. For the first few months, I didn't know what to do with myself. After spending 20 years in service, caring for others, the silence and solitude were almost unbearable. But slowly I learned to fill my days. I planted vegetables and flowers. I befriended the wolves who lived in the nearby forest, running with them under the full moon and remembering what it felt like to be free. I helped the few neighbors I had with various tasks, and they helped me in return. I built a life that was mine and mine alone. Years passed. 5 years became 10. I heard news from the palace occasionally, through traveling merchants and wandering bards. Titus had grown into a fine young man, beloved by the people for his fairness and compassion. Marcus and Claudia had produced 2 more children, daughters who were reportedly beautiful and clever. The kingdom was prospering under Marcus's rule. I told myself I was happy for them, and most days I almost believed it. Then, on the morning of my 45th birthday, a royal carriage appeared on the road leading to my house. I watched it approach with a growing sense of dread, knowing that nothing good could come from a visit from the palace. When the carriage stopped and the door opened, Titus stepped out. Except he wasn't the boy I'd left behind. He was 27 years old now, a fully grown man with his father's bearing and his mother's delicate features. But there was something wrong. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed, and when he saw me standing in my garden, he broke down completely. "Miss Cassia," he sobbed, falling to his knees in the dirt. "Father is dead. He's dead, and I don't know how to do this without you. Please, please come back." The world tilted beneath my feet. Marcus was dead. The man I'd loved for over 30 years, the man who'd broken my heart and given me purpose and haunted my dreams. He was gone. "How?" I managed to ask. "Hunting accident," Titus said, his voice hollow. "A boar gored him. He died before they could get him back to the palace. Happened 3 days ago. The funeral is tomorrow, and then I'll be crowned king. And I don't know how to, I need you." I knelt beside him in the garden and held him while he cried, this grown man who was still the little boy I'd raised. And I felt my own grief rising up, threatening to drown me. Marcus was dead. I would never see him again, never hear his voice, never have the chance to tell him that despite everything, despite all the pain and betrayal and wasted years, I'd never stopped loving him either. "I'll come," I heard myself say, "for the funeral, and to see you crowned. But Titus, I can't stay. Claudia is still queen, and your sisters need their mother. There's no place for me there." "There's always been a place for you," Titus insisted, pulling back to look at me with those golden eyes. "You just never claimed it." We traveled back to the Silver Moon Palace together, and with every mile, I felt the weight of my past settling back onto my shoulders. When we arrived, the entire kingdom was in mourning. Black banners hung from every building, and people moved through the streets with tears streaming down their faces. Marcus had been a good king, a beloved king. His loss was felt by everyone. The palace was chaos. Servants rushed about preparing for the funeral, advisors argued about matters of state, and in the center of it all was Claudia, now the Dowager Queen, orchestrating everything with cold efficiency. When she saw me enter with Titus, her eyes narrowed. "You brought her," she said to her stepson. "Titus, this is highly inappropriate. She has no place here." "She has every place here," Titus said, his voice hard. "She helped raise me. She deserves to pay her respects to my father. And if you have a problem with that, mother, you can take it up with me after I'm crowned king." Claudia's mouth thinned, but she said nothing more. She simply turned and walked away, her spine rigid with disapproval. The funeral was held the next day. Thousands of people attended, filling the palace grounds and spilling out into the surrounding streets. I stood in the back trying to remain invisible, but my eyes were fixed on the stone bier where Marcus's body lay, dressed in his finest robes, his hands folded across his chest. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, as if death had lifted the burdens he'd carried for so long. As the ceremony progressed, I felt something break inside me. All these years I'd held on to the hope that maybe, someday, things would be different. That maybe when he was old and I was old, we could finally be together without all the complications of crowns and politics. But that would never happen now. He was gone, and I would spend the rest of my life carrying this love that had nowhere to go. After the funeral there was the coronation. Titus knelt before the high priest of the moon goddess and received the crown, becoming King Titus Aurelius of the Silver Moon Kingdom. He looked magnificent and terrified in equal measure, and my heart swelled with pride. This was the little boy who'd hidden in the gardens and asked me if being king would be boring. Now he was a king and he would be extraordinary. The celebration feast that followed was subdued, given the recent death of the old king. But tradition demanded that the new king be properly honored, so the court gathered and toasted Titus's reign. I stayed long enough to see him seated on the throne, and then I slipped away, planning to leave at first light and return to my quiet life on the eastern border. But Titus found me before I could escape. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Home," I said simply. "My home. You're king now. You don't need me anymore." "I need you more than ever," he said. "Cassia, I'm about to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you refuse." Something in his tone made me pause. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I'm not getting married. I've decided. I'm 27 years old, and the council has been pressuring me to choose a wife for years. But I've refused every match they've proposed, and I'm going to keep refusing." "Titus, you have to marry," I said gently. "You need an heir. The kingdom needs stability. The kingdom needs a king who makes choices based on what's right, not what's expected," he countered. "My father spent his entire life making the right choices. He married Livia for political alliance. He married Claudia for the same reason. And the whole time, he was miserable because he'd given up the woman he actually loved. I won't make that mistake." "You don't understand," I started, but he cut me off. "I understand perfectly. I've spent my entire life watching what happens when people choose duty over love. I've seen the price both you and my father paid for it. And I've decided that when I marry, it will be because I found someone who makes me feel the way you made my father feel. Someone real. Someone who sees me as Titus, not just as a king." "That's admirable," I said. "But it doesn't explain why you need me here." "Because I want you to be my chief advisor," he said. "I want you to have a position at court, a title, respect. I want everyone to know that you were the one who shaped me into the man I am today. And I want you to help me rule this kingdom the way you helped raise me, with kindness and wisdom and strength." I stared at him, speechless. "Titus, that's impossible. I'm a former servant. The court would never accept it." "I'm the king," he said simply. "They don't have a choice. Please, Cassia. Not in the shadows this time. Not as someone's secret or someone's shame. Stay as yourself in the light, where you always should have been." I wanted to refuse. Every rational part of my brain told me this was a terrible idea, that it would cause nothing but problems. But I was so tired of running, so tired of hiding, so tired of living half a life. "1 year," I finally said. "I'll stay for 1 year and help you transition into your rule. After that, I'm going back to my house." Titus grinned, and in that moment, he looked exactly like the little boy I'd raised. "1 year," he agreed. "But I think once you're here, you won't want to leave." He was right. The first few months were difficult. Claudia made no secret of her displeasure at my presence, and many of the older courtiers were scandalized that a former servant had been elevated to such a high position. But Titus stood firm, and slowly, people began to accept me. They saw that my advice was sound, that I had no political agenda beyond wanting what was best for the kingdom, and that Titus trusted me completely. I found that I was good at this work. Years of watching from the shadows had taught me how the court functioned, what motivated people, where the true power lay. I helped Titus navigate complex negotiations, avoid political traps, and make decisions that benefited the common people as well as the nobility. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My 1-year deadline came and went, and I didn't leave. Titus never mentioned it, and neither did I. We both knew I was home. 3 more years passed. Titus continued to refuse all marriage proposals, insisting he would marry for love or not at all. The council grumbled, but they couldn't force him. And in truth, the kingdom was thriving under his rule. He'd implemented reforms that improved the lives of common wolves, strengthened the military, and forged new alliances with neighboring territories. He didn't need a wife to prove he was a capable king. On the 5th anniversary of his coronation, Titus hosted a grand celebration. Dignitaries came from across the realm, and the palace was filled with music and laughter. I spent most of the evening managing logistics, making sure everything ran smoothly, content to work behind the scenes as I always had. But then, in the middle of the feast, Titus stood and called for silence. "I have an announcement," he said, and the entire hall quieted. "5 years ago, I became king of the Silver Moon Kingdom. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve you all. But I could not have done it without the woman who taught me everything that truly matters." He turned to look directly at me, and my heart began to pound. "Cassia Silvanus," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Would you please join me?" I had no choice but to walk to the front of the room, where Titus stood on the dais. Every eye in the hall was fixed on us, and I could feel the confusion and curiosity radiating from the crowd. "Titus, what are you doing?" I whispered. "Something I should have done years ago," he said. Then, to my absolute shock, he dropped to one knee in front of me. The entire hall gasped. "You are not my mother by blood," Titus said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you are the only mother I have ever known. You raised me, shaped me, loved me when you had no obligation to do so. You sacrificed your own happiness to ensure mine. And I have never properly thanked you for it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, I saw a ring. Not a wedding ring but something else. A signet ring bearing the royal seal. "I am making you Lady Cassia Silvanus, advisor to the crown and member of the royal family. You will have lands, title, and the respect you have always deserved. And more than that, I am officially recognizing you as my mother in all but blood. If you'll accept." Tears were streaming down my face. Around us, the hall had erupted in whispers, but I barely heard them. "Titus," I breathed. "You don't have to do this." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to. Please, let me give you what my father never could. Let me honor you the way you should have been honored all along." I looked at this young king kneeling before me, this man I'd watched grow from infant to ruler, and I realized that he'd just given me something more precious than any crown. Acknowledgement, validation, love that wasn't hidden in shadows but declared in the light of day, in front of the entire kingdom. "I accept," I whispered, and the hall exploded in applause. Titus stood and slipped the ring onto my finger, and then he pulled me into an embrace. "You're my real queen," he whispered in my ear. "You always have been." That night, after the celebration ended, I stood on the balcony of my new chambers, not the servants' quarters, but actual rooms in the royal wing, and looked out over the kingdom. The moon was full and bright, and I could see wolves running in the distant forests, free and wild. I thought about Marcus, and how he'd once promised to make me his queen. He'd broken that promise, but in a way it had come true anyway. Not through him but through his son. Through the boy I'd helped raise, who'd grown into a man with enough courage to choose love over expectation, to honor truth over tradition. The door behind me opened, and I turned to find Claudia standing there. We'd maintained a careful distance over the years, not quite enemies but certainly not friends. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. I blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For not seeing what Marcus saw in you," she said. "For resenting you all these years. I was his wife but you were his heart. And I hated you for it. But watching Titus tonight, seeing how much he loves you, finally understand. You weren't trying to steal anything from me. You were just trying to survive a situation neither of us chose. We were both victims of circumstances," I said quietly. "Marcus loved us both in different ways. But he loved his kingdom most of all." "He was a fool," Claudia said bluntly. "He should have chosen you. The kingdom would have survived." But he broke both of your hearts trying to do the right thing, and in the end, he died alone and unhappy. I hope Titus is smarter than his father was. He already is, I said. Claudia nodded, then hesitated. For what it's worth, she said. I'm glad you're here. Titus needs you. Think I do too. You understand things about this family that I never will. It was as close to a peace offering as I was likely to get, and I accepted it with grace. Thank you, I said. After she left, I stayed on the balcony for hours, watching the moon track across the sky and thinking about the strange, winding path my life had taken. I'd been a servant, a secret lover, a nanny, an exile, and now a lady of the realm. I'd loved a king who could never fully love me back, and I'd raised a king who loved me enough for both of them. 2 more years passed in relative peace. I settled into my role, and people gradually forgot that I'd once scrubbed their floors. I was simply Lady Cassia now, the king's most trusted advisor and his adopted mother. Titus continued to refuse marriage proposals, much to the council's frustration, and I began to worry that he would never find someone who could match his impossible standards. Then Princess Aurelia arrived from the Western Kingdoms. She came as part of a diplomatic delegation, and from the moment she entered the throne room, every eye was on her. She was beautiful, yes, with copper-colored hair and eyes like emeralds. But more than that, she was vivid and alive in a way that made everyone else seem faded. She spoke her mind freely, laughed without restraint, and when she was introduced to Titus, she looked him directly in the eye and said, "So you're the king everyone says is impossible to impress. Let's see about that." I saw the exact moment Titus fell in love with her. It was in the middle of a state dinner, when Aurelia was telling a story about fighting off bandits on the road to the Silver Moon Kingdom. She described the battle with dramatic gestures and self-deprecating humor, and Titus laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. His eyes lit up and he leaned forward in his chair, completely entranced. After the dinner, he found me in my chambers. "I'm going to marry her," he announced without preamble. Smiled. "You just met her 6 hours ago." "I know," he said. "But I also know what it feels like to be in the presence of someone who makes the entire world make sense. That's what she does. And I'm not letting her leave without at least trying to win her heart. What if she doesn't feel the same way?" Asked gently. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life alone," he said simply. "Because now that I know what it feels like to feel this way, I can't settle for anything less. You taught me that. You and my father taught me what happens when you compromise on love. I won't do it." Over the next 3 months, I watched Titus court Princess Aurelia with single-minded determination. He showered her with attention, took her on adventures through the kingdom, engaged her in long philosophical debates, and treated her like an equal in every way. And slowly, miraculously, she fell for him too. Their engagement was announced 6 months after they met, and the entire kingdom celebrated. Finally, their bachelor king had found his queen. The wedding was planned for the following spring, and this time when I watched the preparations, I felt only joy. The night before the wedding, Aurelia came to my chambers. "I wanted to thank you," she said, sitting down on the couch beside me. "For what?" I asked. "For raising him right," she said. "Titus told me your story. Everything. About you and his father, about how you stayed and cared for him when you should have left, about how you sacrificed your own happiness for his. He said you're the reason he refused to marry anyone he didn't truly love, because he saw what happened when people made other choices." "His father was a good man," I said. "He just made difficult decisions." "His father was an idiot," Aurelia said bluntly. "No offense. But anyone who had the love of someone like you and chose politics instead deserves to die with regrets. I'm not making that mistake. I'm marrying Titus because I love him, yes. But also because I respect him. Because he's the kind of man who honors the people who shaped him, even when it's not convenient or politically advantageous. That's rare." "He's going to be a great king," I said. "Better than his father. Better than any of us." "He already is," Aurelia said. And when we have children, I hope they turn out half as well as he did. You did an incredible job, Lady Cassia. The wedding was everything a royal wedding should be. Beautiful, joyous, filled with hope for the future. I stood in the front row this time, not hidden in the shadows, and when Titus placed the crown on Aurelia's head and declared her his queen, I wept. But they were happy tears. Healing tears. After the ceremony, as the celebration was in full swing, Titus found me standing alone on a balcony. "Thank you," he said, pulling me into an embrace. "For everything. For staying. For being here to see this. For being my mother when no one else would. Thank you for choosing love," I said. "Your father would be so proud of you." "I hope so," Titus said quietly. "I hope he's watching from wherever he is, and I hope he sees that his mistakes weren't wasted, that they taught me how to do things differently." We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration below. And then Titus said something that made my heart stop. "I found his journals," he said. "Father's private journals. I've been reading them over the past few months, trying to understand him better. And Cassia, every single entry mentions you. Even after he married Claudia, even in the last year of his life. Every single entry. What did they say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That he loved you. That choosing duty over you was the biggest mistake of his life. That he hoped somehow you'd found happiness without him. And in his final entry, written the morning of the day he died, he wrote." Titus paused, his voice catching. He wrote, "If the moon goddess grants me one wish before I leave this world, let it be that Cassia knows I never stopped loving her. That every day without her was a day I lived as half a man. And that if I could go back and choose again, I would choose her every time." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. After all these years, after all the pain and sacrifice and wasted time, Marcus had loved me. He'd always loved me. And he'd died carrying that love, unable to speak it aloud but unable to let it go. "He was going to come find you," Titus continued. "There's a letter in his things addressed to you. He never sent it. But in it, he says that after I married and he was no longer needed as king, he was going to abdicate and come to your house on the eastern border. He was going to ask if you would give him a second chance, even though he didn't deserve one. But he never got the opportunity." Titus pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to me. It was sealed with Marcus's personal signet, the wax still intact. "This belongs to you," he said. "I thought you should have it." I took the letter with trembling hands, feeling the weight of it, the promise and regret sealed inside. "Thank you," I managed to say. Titus kissed my forehead and then returned to the celebration, leaving me alone with the final words of the man I'd loved for 30 years. For a long time I just held the letter, unable to bring myself to break the seal. Part of me wanted to know what he'd written. But another part of me was afraid that reading his words would break me all over again. Finally, as the moon rose full and bright overhead, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Marcus's handwriting was familiar, precise and elegant, the same handwriting I'd seen on countless royal documents. But these words were different. These were just for me. "My dearest Cassia, I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to send this letter. I don't know if you'll even want to hear from me after all these years, after everything I put you through. But I need to write these words, even if they never leave this page, even if they burn with me when I die. I was a coward. There's no other word for it. I chose my crown over your heart, not once but twice, and I have paid for that choice every single day since. I told myself I was being noble, that I was putting the kingdom first, that duty demanded I make sacrifices. But the truth is I was just afraid. Afraid of what the council would say, afraid of losing my power, afraid of being seen as weak. And so I chose power over love, and it destroyed me. Livia was a good woman, and I cared for her deeply. But she wasn't you. Claudia is practical and intelligent, and she has given me 2 beautiful daughters. But she isn't you. No one has ever been you, Cassia. No one has ever made me feel the way you did, like I was more than just a king, more than just a crown. Like I was just Marcus, just a man, and that was enough. I have wasted my life chasing the wrong things. I thought ruling wisely was enough. I thought providing for my people, maintaining peace, building a legacy. I thought that would fill the emptiness you left behind. But every night, I lie awake and remember the feel of you in my arms. I remember your laugh, your courage, the way you looked at me like I was something precious. And I know that all my accomplishments mean nothing because I gave up the only thing that truly mattered. You saved my life that night in the garden, all those years ago. You pulled me from the snow and kept me breathing when I should have died. But I never returned the favor. Instead, I took your love and your loyalty and your years, and I gave you nothing but pain in return. If you're reading this, it means I've finally found the courage to reach out to you. Or perhaps I'm dead, and Titus has discovered this letter among my effects and decided you should have it. Either way, I need you to know these things. Sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry for every choice I made that hurt you. You deserved so much better than the man I was. Love you. I have loved you from the moment I opened my eyes and saw you tending my wounds. I loved you through 2 marriages and countless years apart. I will love you until the day I die, and beyond that if the moon goddess allows it. And finally, though I have no right to ask this of you, I need to know if there's any chance for us. I'm planning to abdicate the throne once Titus marries. He doesn't need me anymore. The kingdom doesn't need me. But I need you. I need to spend whatever years I have left trying to make amends for the ones I wasted. I'm coming to find you, Cassia. I'm coming to your house on the eastern border. And I'm going to kneel at your feet the way I should have done 30 years ago. And I'm going to ask if you can forgive me. If you can give a foolish old king one more chance to be the man you deserved all along. I don't expect you to say yes. I don't expect anything. But I have to try. Even if you turn me away, even if you've moved on and built a life without me, I have to try. Because you are my only regret. And my only love. Forever yours, Marcus. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, my heart breaking and healing in the same moment. He had loved me. He'd always loved me. And he'd been planning to give up everything. His crown, his pride, his carefully maintained dignity, to come find me. To ask for forgiveness he didn't expect to receive. But he'd never gotten the chance. The hunting accident had stolen that from both of us. We would never know what might have happened if he'd made it to my door. If I would have taken him back or turned him away. If we could have built something real in the twilight of our lives. Free from the constraints of crowns and politics. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it against my heart. And then I looked up at the full moon and whispered, I would have taken you back, you foolish man. I would have always taken you back. The celebration continued far into the night. I eventually returned to join it, my eyes still red from crying, Marcus's letter tucked safely in my pocket. Aurelia saw me and immediately came over, concern written on her face. Are you all right? She asked. I'm perfect, I said, and realized it was true. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The years that followed were the happiest of my life. Titus and Aurelia ruled the Silver Moon Kingdom with wisdom and compassion, and they gave me 3 beautiful grandchildren to spoil. Yes, grandchildren, because that's what I was now. Not by blood but by love. And love, I'd learned, was stronger than any bloodline. On the 10th anniversary of Titus's coronation, he commissioned a portrait for the throne room. It showed the royal family, Titus and Aurelia and their 3 children. But beside them he added 2 more figures. One was Livia, the mother Titus had never known but always honored. And the other was me. When I saw the portrait for the first time I couldn't speak. There I was, immortalized in paint and canvas, standing beside the royal family not as a servant or an outsider, but as one of them. Lady Cassia Silvanus, mother to the king, grandmother to the heirs of the Silver Moon Kingdom. You're part of our legacy now, Titus said, standing beside me as we looked at the painting. Future generations will see your face and know your name. They'll know that you were the woman who shaped a king, even when no one thought you were worthy of recognition. Your father would have hated this, I said, but I was smiling through my tears. No, Titus said. I think he would have loved it. I think he would have looked at this painting and known that even though he failed you, I didn't. That the love you gave him and me wasn't wasted. That night I had a dream. I was young again, standing in the palace gardens in winter. And Marcus was there too, young and vital, without the weight of a crown on his head. He held out his hand to me, and I took it. "I'm sorry it took so long," he said. "It's okay," I replied. "We're here now." And we were. Not in life but in legacy. In the king he'd raised and the kingdom I'd helped shape. In the portrait that would hang in the throne room for centuries, showing that love, even imperfect, complicated, heartbreaking love, leaves its mark on the world. I woke from the dream with tears on my cheeks and peace in my heart. Marcus was gone. But I was still here. And I had been given something he never had. The chance to see my choices validated, my love recognized, my worth acknowledged. The Alpha King had chosen others over me. But his heir had chosen to honor me. And in the end that was enough. I lived another 15 years after that dream, watching Titus's children grow into fine young wolves, watching the kingdom prosper under wise leadership, watching the world change and evolve. And when I finally felt the moon goddess calling me home, I went peacefully, surrounded by the family I'd built from ashes and heartbreak and stubborn, relentless love. They buried me in the royal crypts, beside Livia. 2 women who'd loved the same man, who'd been bound together by circumstance and tragedy, who'd both sacrificed everything for a child that needed them. And above our tombs, Titus placed an inscription that read, "Here lie the 2 queens of the Silver Moon Kingdom. One wore the crown. One earned it." But that's not quite the end of my story. Because 5 years after I died, something extraordinary happened. Titus's eldest son, young Marcus, named for his grandfather, was exploring the old servants' quarters of the palace, the section that had been abandoned and closed off decades earlier. He was 17, rebellious and curious, and he'd heard rumors that there were secret passages hidden in those forgotten hallways. He found more than passages. He found a small room at the very end of the corridor, a room that had once been mine. And in that room, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, he found something I'd kept secret my entire life. A journal. My journal. Every thought, every feeling, every moment of joy and pain I'd experienced during those years in the palace. I'd written it all down in the deep hours of night when sleep wouldn't come. I'd hidden it away because some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud, but too important to forget. Young Marcus brought the journal to his father, and Titus read it cover to cover in a single sitting. He read about the night I'd saved his grandfather from bleeding to death in the snow. About the 2 years of secret love that followed. About the promises that were made and broken. About watching Marcus marry Livia while my heart shattered into pieces. About the night Titus was born and Livia died. About Marcus's midnight visits and whispered confessions. About Claudia and the fire. About every moment of pain and every glimmer of joy I'd experienced in that palace. And at the very end of the journal, on the final page, I'd written something I'd never had the courage to say aloud. I don't regret any of it. Not the pain, not the heartbreak, not the years spent loving someone who couldn't fully love me back. Because all of it, every moment of suffering, every tear, every impossible choice, led me to Titus. To raising a boy who would become a king worth serving. To building a legacy that had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with love. Marcus Aurelius was my greatest love and my deepest wound. But Titus is my redemption. He is proof that nothing is ever truly wasted, that love finds ways to perpetuate itself even when it seems impossible, that the woman nobody wanted to see became the foundation upon which a kingdom was built. If I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't. I would save Marcus in the snow again. I would stay when I should have left. I would love him through 2 marriages and countless betrayals. I would raise his son as my own. I would endure it all again because it led me here, to a life that mattered, to a family that chose me, to a legacy that will outlive us all. The Alpha King chose others over me. But I chose love anyway. And love in the end chose me back. When Titus finished reading, he was weeping openly. He called for his family, Aurelia, his children, his half-sisters, even his stepmother Claudia, now an elderly woman nearing the end of her own life. And he read the journal aloud to all of them, sharing every secret, every truth, every moment of his mother's hidden history. "This changes nothing," he said when he finished. "And it changes everything. I already knew Mother Cassia sacrificed everything for me. But I didn't know the full scope of what she endured, what she gave up, how much she suffered in silence. And I want her story to be remembered. Not hidden away like a shameful secret, but celebrated as the foundation of our family." So Titus did something unprecedented. He commissioned a second portrait for the throne room, this one showing Marcus and me together, young and in love, standing in the gardens where I'd saved his life. Beneath it, he placed an excerpt from my journal, the final entry, for all the kingdom to read. And he declared a new tradition. Every year on the anniversary of my death, the royal family would gather in the crypts and read from my journal, keeping my story alive for future generations, ensuring that no one ever forgot the servant girl who loved a king, who raised a prince, who became the invisible heart of a dynasty. "She was invisible for too long," Titus told his children. "We will make sure she is never invisible again." The tradition continues to this day, or so I'm told. 'Cause yes, I can see them even now. The moon goddess has granted me the ability to watch over the family I built, the legacy I created. I see young Marcus, now king himself, reading my journal to his own children. I see them asking questions about me, about their great-grandmother who wasn't related to them by blood but shaped their entire lineage. I see the portrait in the throne room, the one showing me and Marcus in the gardens, and I see the way people stop to look at it. The way they read the inscription beneath and whisper about the legendary love story between a king and a servant. How it ended in tragedy but created something beautiful anyway. Sometimes late at night I see Marcus too. Not the old king he became, burdened by regret and responsibility, but the young man I fell in love with in the snow. The moon goddess has allowed us to be together in death in ways we never could in life. We walk through eternal gardens together, his hand in mine, and we talk about everything we should have said when we still had breath in our lungs. "I would have given it all up for you," he tells me every time. "If I could go back, I would abandon the crown, the kingdom, everything." "I know," I always reply. "But then Titus wouldn't exist. Your daughters wouldn't exist. The kingdom wouldn't have flourished the way it did under your rule. Everything happened exactly as it needed to. But you suffered," he says, his voice breaking. "You suffered because of my cowardice." "I suffered because of love," I correct him. "And love is always worth the suffering. You taught me that, even if you didn't mean to." We walk in comfortable silence, and I think about all the young wolves still living, still fighting their own battles between duty and desire, between what they want and what they think they should want. And I hope my story reaches them. I hope they read my journal and see that there's no one right answer, no perfect path. Sometimes you choose love and lose everything. Sometimes you choose duty and lose yourself. Sometimes you find a way to do both. And sometimes the love you give doesn't return to you directly. It echoes through generations, shaping the world in ways you never imagined. My name is Cassia Silvanus. I was nobody, became somebody. I loved a king who couldn't choose me, and I raised a king who did. The Alpha King chose others over me, but his heir knelt at my feet and called me his real queen. And you know what? He was right. Not because of a crown or a title or recognition from the court, but because I ruled over the only kingdom that truly mattered, the kingdom of love, resilience, and unbreakable bonds that transcend blood and status and time itself. I was the real queen all along. I just had to wait 30 years for someone to see it. So if you're out there right now, feeling invisible, feeling like your love doesn't matter, like your sacrifices go unnoticed, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. Everything you give, every moment of pain you endure, every time you choose to love even when it would be easier to hate, it all matters. It's all building something. You just might not live long enough to see the full picture. But someone will. Someone will look back at your life and say, that person was the foundation of everything good that came after. Someone will honor you, even if it takes decades. Someone will see your worth, even if you never wore a crown. Because queens aren't made by crowns. They're made by the strength of their hearts, the depth of their love, and the courage to keep going even when the world refuses to see them. And by that measure I was always a queen. The truest queen the Silver Moon Kingdom ever had. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt invisible or loved someone who couldn't fully love you back, do me one final favor. Subscribe to this channel, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Because wherever you are, you deserve a hug. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to know that your story matters, even when it feels like nobody's paying attention. The moon goddess sees you. See you. And someday, someone will honor your sacrifice the way Titus honored mine. This is Cassia Silvanus, signing off from the Eternal Gardens. May you all find the courage to love boldly, to endure gracefully, and to know your worth even when the world refuses to acknowledge it. You are seen. You are valued. You are queens and kings in your own right. Never forget that.